Hello everyone. I'm gonna get some water really quickly. You can dance away. Okay. Let's be efficient. Let's get some good reading in. Hopefully I don't jumble my words up like I did last time. Let's just get into it. All right, it's going to be a really productive week. It has to be. I will not have a productive week. It's going to be a good one. Okay. Let's go here. Okay, so these coast pilots are constantly exasperated. They are not happy men. When anything happens, they are blamed, and their writing takes on an austere tone because of it. No matter how hard they work, the relentlessness of nature and the carelessness of man are always two jumps ahead of them. We run happily up under Pietra Point, as suggested, and drop our anchor and put up the American flag and under it the yellow quarantine flag. We would have liked to fire a gun, but we only had the 10 gauge shotgun, and its hammer was rusted down, so it was only for a show of force, anyways. We had never intended it for warlike purposes. And then we sat and we waited. The sight was beautiful, the highland of Prieta Point and a tower on the hillside. It was the distance we could see the beach of La Paz, and it really looked like a Hollywood production. The fine, low buildings closed down to the water and trees flanking them, and a colored bandstand on the water's edge. The little canoes of Nayrit sailed by, and the sea was ruffled with a fair breeze. We took some color motion pictures of the scene, but they didn't come out either. After what seemed like a very long time, the little launch mentioned in the Coast Pilot started for us, but it had no white flag and the letter P. Like the municipal pier that was gone, the pilot, an elderly man in a business suit and a dark hat, came stiffly aboard. He had great dignity. He refused a drink, accepted cigarettes, took his position at the wheel, and ordered us grandly. He looked like an admiral in civilian's clothes. He governed texts with a sensitive hand, a gentle push forward against the air meant ahead. A flattened hand patting downward signified slow, a quick thumb over the shoulder reverse. He was not a talkative man, and he ran through the channel with ease, hardly scraping us at all, and signaled our anchor down 250 yards westward of the municipal pier. If there had been one, the choicest place in the harbor. La Paz grew in fascination as we approached. The square, iron shuttered colonial houses stood up right in the back of the beach with rows of beautiful trees in front of them. It is a lovely place. There is a broad promenade along the water lined with benches named for dead residents of the city where one may rest oneself. Soon after we anchored, the port captain, customs man, and agent came aboard. The captain read our papers, which complimented us rather highly, and was so impressed that he immediately assigned us an armed guard, or rather 3 shifts of armed guards, to protect us from theft. At first, we did not like this, since we had to pay these men, but we soon found the wisdom for it. For we For we swarmed the visitors from morning to night. Little boys clustered on us like flies in the rigging and on the deck. And although we were infested and crawling with very poor people and children, we lost nothing. And this, in spite of the fact that there were little gadgets lying about that any one of us would have stolen if we had the chance. The guards simply kept our visitors out of the galley and out of the cabin. But We do not think they prevented theft, for in other ports where we had no guard, nothing was stolen. The guards, big, pleasant men, armed with heavy automatics, wore uniforms that were yeah, starched and clean, and they were helpful and sociable. They ate with us and drank coffee with us, told us many valuable things about the town, and in the end, we gave each of them a carton of cigarettes, which seemed valuable to them. Mm. But they were the reverse of what is usually thought and written of Mexican soldiers. They were clean, efficient, and friendly. With the port captain came the agent, probably the finest invention of all. He did everything for us, provisioned for us, escorted us, took us to dinner, argued prices for us in local stores, warned us about some places, and recommended others. His fee was so small that we doubled it out of pure gratitude. As soon as we were cleared, Sparky, Tiny, and Tex went ashore and disappeared, and we did not see them until late that night, but they came back with the usual presents: shawls, carved cow horns, and colored handkerchiefs. They were so delighted with the exchange that we were very soon deeply laden and curious. There were 5 huge stuffed sea turtles in one bunk alone, and Japanese toy combs from New England. Oh wait, and Japanese combs from New England, Spanish shawls from New Jersey, machetes from Sheffield and New York. But all of them have, from having merely lived a while in La Paz, had taken on a definite Mexican flavor. Tony, who does not trust foreigners, stayed aboard, but later even he went ashore for a while. The tide was running low, and the low shore east of town was beginning to show through the shallow water. We gathered our paraphernalia and started for the beach, expecting and finding a fauna new to us. Here on the flats, the water is warm, very warm, and there is no wave shock. It would be strange indeed if, with few expectations of ubiquitous animals, there should be a definite change. The base of this flat was of rubble in which many knobs and limbs of old coal were embedded, making an easy hiding place for burrowing animals. In rubber boots, we moved over the flat uncovered by the dropping tide. A silty sand made the water obscure when a rock or a piece of coral was turned over. And as always, when one is collecting, we were soon joined by a number of small boys. The very posture of search, the slow movement with um, wait a second. You could dance away. Okay, yeah. Love takes miles. Cause love takes miles. You and I hold suddenly know. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Head down seems to draw people. What did you lose? They ask nothing. Then what did you search for? And this is an embarrassing question. We search for something that will seem like truth to us. We search for understanding. We search for that principle which keys us deeply into the pattern of all life. We search for the relations of things, one to another. At this young man searches for warm light in his wife's eyes, and that one for the hot warmth of fighting. These little boys and young men on the tide flat do not even know that they search for such things too. We say to them, we are looking for curios, for small animals. Then the little boy helps us to search. They are ragged and dark, and each one of them carries a small iron harpoon. It is the toy of La Paz, owned and treasured as the tops of marbles are in America. They poke about the rocks with their little harpoons, and then a lazeling fish which blutters too close feels the bite of the iron. There is a small ghost shrimp which lives on these flats, an efficient little fellow who lives in a burrow. He moves very rapidly and is armed with claws which can pinch painfully. He retires backward into his hole so that to come at him from above is to invite his weapons. The little boys solved the problem for us. We offered 10 centavos for each one they took. They dug into the rubble and old coral until they got behind the ghost shrimp in his burrow. Then, prodding, they drove him outraged from his hole. Then they banged him good to reduce his pinching power. We refused to buy the banged up ones. They had to give us lively ones. Small boys are the best collectors in the world. Soon they worked out a technique for catching the shrimps with only an occasional pinched finger, and then the 10 centavo pieces began running out, and an increasing cloud of little boys brought us specimens. Small boys had sharp eyes, and they were quick to notice deviation. Once they know you are generally curious, they bring amazing things. Perhaps we only practice an extension of their urge. Perhaps we only practice an extension of their. It is easy to remember when we were small and lay on our stomachs beside a tide pool, and our minds and eyes went so deeply into that size and identity. Were lost, and the creeping hermit crab was our size, and the tiny octopus monster. Then the waving algae covered us, and we hid under a rock at the bottom and all leapt out at fish. It is possible that we and even those who probe space with equations simply extend this wonder. Among small boys groups, there is usually a stupid one who understands nothing, who brings dull things, rocks and pieces of weed, and pretends that he knows what he does. When we think of La Paz, of some it is always of the small boys that we think first, for we had many dealings with them on many levels. The profile of this flat was easy to get. The ghost shrimps called langusta were quite common. Our enemy, the stinging worm, was about to make us careful of our fingers. The big brittle stars were there under the old coral, but not in such great masses as the eastern Santo. A number of sponges clung to the stones, and small decorative crabs sculled in the interstices. Beautiful purple poly-cladded worms crawled over lawns of purple tunicates. The giant oyster-like hacho was not often found, but we took a few specimens. There were several growth forms of the common corals, the larger and the handsomer of the two slim asteroids, anemones of at least three types, some club urchins and snails, and many hydroids. Some of the exposed snails were so massed with forest of algae and hydroids that they were invisible to us. We found a worm-like fixed gastropod, many bivalves, including the long peanut-shaped boring clam, large, brilliant orange nudibranchs, Carter hermit crabs, mantids, flatworms, which seemed to flow over the rocks like living gelatin, spinaclids, and many limpets. There were a few sun stars, but not so many or so large as they had been at Cape San Lucas. The little boys ran to and fro with full hands, and our brackets and tubes were soon filled. The 10 centavo pieces had long run out, and 10 little boys often had to join a club whose center and interest was a silver peso, to be changed and divvied later. They seemed to trust one another for the division, and perhaps they felt there was no chance of their being robbed. Perhaps they are not civilized and do not know how valuable money is. The poor little savages seem not to have learned the great principle of cheating one another. Hmm. The population of small boys at La Paz is tremendous, and we had business dealing with a good part of it. Hardly we returned to the Western Flyer and begun to lay out our specimens when we were invaded. Word had spread that there was a crazy people in port who gave money for things boys could pick up under the rocks. We were more than invaded. We were deluged with small boys bearing specimens. They came out in canoes and flatboats. They even swam out to us, and all of them carried specimens. Some of the things they brought we wanted, and some we did not. There were hurt feelings about this, but no bitterness. Battalions of boys swarmed back to the flats and returned again. The second day, little boys came even from the hills, and they brought every conceivable little thing. If we had not sailed the second night, they would have swamped the boat. Meanwhile, in our dealings on shore, more boys were involved. Bro, what is Um, like they carried packages, ran errands, directed us, mostly wrong, tried to anticipate our wishes, but one boy soon emerged. He was not like the other. His shoulders were not slender, but broad, and there was a hint about his face, an expression that seemed Germanic or perhaps Anglo Saxon. Whereas the other boys lived for the job and for the payment, this boy created jobs and looked ahead. He did errands that were not necessary. He made himself indispensable. Late at night, he waited, and the first dawn saw him on our deck. Further, the other small boys seemed a little afraid of him, and gradually they faded into the background and left him in charge. Some day this boy will be very rich, and La Paz will be proud of him, for he will own the things other people must buy or rent. He was the look, and he has the look and the method for success. Even the first day, um, even the first day, success went to his head, and he begun to cheat us a little bit. We did not mind, for it was a good thing to be cheated a little. It causes a genality, and can be limited fairly easily. His method was simple. He performed a task, and then getting each of us alone, he collected for the job so that he was paid several times. We decided we would not use him anymore, but the other little boys decided even better than we. He disappeared, and later we saw him in the town. His nose and lips were heavily bandaged. We had the story from another little boy. Our financial wizard told the others that he was our sole servant, that he and that we had said that they weren't to come around anymore. But they discovered the lie and waylaid him and beat him very badly. He wasn't a very brave boy, but he will be rich. He will be a rich one because he wants to. The others wanted only sweets or the new handkerchief, but the aggressive little boy wishes to be rich, and they will not be able to compete with him. On the evening of our sailing, we had a rather sad experience with another small little boy. We had come ashore for a stroll, leaving our boat tied along a log on the beach. We walked up the curiously familiar streets and ended, oddly enough, in a bar to have a glass of beer. It was a large bar with high ceilings and nearly deserted. As we sat sipping our beer, we saw a ferocious face scowling at us. It was a small, it was a very small black Indian boy, and the look in his eyes was one of hatred. He stared at us so long and so fiercely that we finished our glasses and got up to go. But outside, he fell into step with us, saying nothing. We walked back through the softly lightened streets, and he kept pace. But near the beach, he began to pant deeply. Finally, we go to the beach, and as we are about to untie the skiff, he shouted in panic, "Cinco centavos!" and as he stepped back as from a blow. And then it seemed that we could almost see how it was. We have been the same way trying to get a job. Perhaps the father of this little boy said, "Stupid one, there are strangers in town and they're throwing money away. Here sits your father with a sore leg, and you do nothing. Other boys are becoming rich, but you, because of your sloth, are not taking advantage of this miracle. Senor Ruiz had a cigar this afternoon and a glass of beer at the cantina, because his fine son is not like you. When you have known me, your father, to have a cigar. Never. Now go, bring back some little piece of money." And that boy, hating to do it, was burdened with it nevertheless. He hated us, just as we hated the men we have had to ask for jobs. And he was afraid, too, for we were foreigners. He put it off as long as he could, but when we were about to go, he had to ask, and he made it very humble. Fine, 5 centavos. It did seem that we knew how hard it had been. We gave him a peso, and then he smiled broadly, and he looked up about for something he could do for us. The boat was tied up, and he attacked the water-soaked knot with the terrier, even working at it with his teeth. But he was too little, and he could not do it. He nearly cried then. We cast off and pushed the boat away, and He waited out to guide us as far as he could. We felt both good and bad about it. We hope his father bought a cigar and in a gar a gardente a gardente and became mellow and said to a group of men in that little boy's hearing, "Now you take Juanito. You have rarely seen such a good son. This very cigar is a gift to his father who has a hurt leg. It is a matter of pride, my friends, to have a son like Juanito, and we hope he gave Juanito, if that was his name, 5 centavos to buy an ice and a paper bowl with his firecracker inside. No doubt we were badly cheated in La Paz. Perhaps the boatman cheated us, and maybe we paid too much for supplies. It is very hard to know. And besides, we were so incredibly rich that we couldn't tell. And we had no instinct for knowing when we were cheated. Here we were rich, but in our own country it is not so. The very rich develop an instinct which tells them when they are cheated. We knew a rich man who owned several large office buildings. Once, in reading his reports, he found that two electric light bulbs had been stolen from one of the toilets in one of his office buildings. It hurt him. He brooded about it for weeks. Civilization is dying, he said. Whom can you trust anymore? This little theft is an indication that the whole people is morally rotten. But we were so newly rich and we didn't know, and besides, we were a little flattered. The boatmen raised their price as soon as they saw the sea cow wouldn't work. But as I said, times are very hard and there is no money. You could fly, you could fall away. 'Cause love takes miles. Everybody's on a fool. You could only get enough. You're only trying to show love takes miles. I don't fall in love, sorrow's whole. You were there, my lullaby. You could see it on my head. I will rock in your shoes instead. I cannot see it. 'Cause love takes miles. You were there on a restaurant. You was there with your restaurant and fall asleep. Oh, hello, my friend in need. Okay, next part. This was Good Friday, March 22nd, and we scrubbed ourselves and put our best clothes and went to church, all of us. We were a kind of parade on the way to church, feeling foreign and out of place. In the dark church, it was cool, and there were a great many people, old women in their black shawls and Indians kneeling motionless on the floor. It was not a very rich church, and it was old and out of repair, but a choir of small black children made up the stations of the cross. They sang music that sounded like old Spanish madrigals, and their voices were shrill and sharp. Sometimes they faltered a little bit on the melody, but they hit the end of each line shrieking. When they had finished, a fine-looking young priest with a thin, ascetic face and hot eyes of fervency preached from over their heads. He filled the whole church with his faith, and the people were breathlessly still. The ugly blood Christs and simpering virgins and the overdressed saints were suddenly out of it. The priest was purer and cleaner and stronger than they. Out of his own purity, he seemed to plead for them. After a long time, we got up and went out of the dark, cool church into the blinding white sunlight. Oh, shit. The streets were very quiet on Good Friday, and no wind blew in trees, and the air was full of the day, a kind of hush, as though the world awaited a little breathlessly and dreadful experiment of Christ with dead in hell, the testing in a furnace of an idea, and the trees and hills and the people seemed to wait as a man waits when his wife is having a baby, expectant, frightened, horrified, and half unbelieving. There was no certainty that the Easter of resurrection will come. We were probably literally, literarily affected by the service and the people and their feeling about it. The crippled and the pained who were in the church, and the little half hungry children, the ancient women with eyes of patient tragedy up who stared up at the plaster saints with eyes of such pleading. We liked them and we felt at peace with them, and strolling slowly through the streets, we thought a long time of these people in church. We thought of the spirits of kindness which periodically cause them to be fed a little before they are dropped back to hunger. And we thought of the good men who labored to cure them of disease and poverty. And then we thought of what we were, of what they are, and we are products of disease and sorrow and hunger and alcoholism. And suppose some all powerful mind and will sure cure our species so that for a number of generations we would be healthy and happy. We are the products of our disease and suffering. These are factors as powerful as other genetic factors. To cure and feed would be to change the species, and the result would be another animal entirely. We wonder if we would be able to tolerate our own species without a history of syphilis and tuberculosis. We don't know. Certain communicants of the neurological conditioning religious practiced by cowardly people who, by narrowing their emotional experience, hope to broaden their lives, lead us to think we would not like this new species. These religionists being afraid not only of pain and sorrow, but even of joy, so that can so protect themselves that they seem dead to us. The new animal resulting from purification of the species might be one we wouldn't like at all. For it is those struggle and sorrow that people are able to participate in one another. The heartlessness of the healthy, well fed, and unsorrowful person has in it an infinite smugness. Oh, I'm getting tired. You can dance away. You can dance away. On the water's edge of La Paz, a new hotel was going up, and it looked very expensive. Probably the airplanes will bring weekenders from Los Angeles before long. And the beautiful, poor, bedraggled old town will bloom with the Floridian ugliness. Hearing a burst of chicken voices, we looked over a mud wall and saw that there were indeed chickens in the yard behind it. We asked then of a woman we might buy several from. They could be sold, she said, but they were not what one calls for sale. We entered her yard. One of one of the proofs that they were not for sale was that we had to catch them ourselves. We picked out two which looked a little less muscular than the others and went for them. Whatever has been said, true or not, of indolence of the lower Californian is entirely untrue of his chickens. They were athletes, highly trained both in speed and methods of escape. They could run, fly, and, when cornered, disappear entirely and rematerialize in another part of the yard. If the owner did not want to catch them, that hesitancy was not shared by the rest of La Paz. People and children came from everywhere. A mob collected, first to give excited advice and then to help. A pillar of dust arose out of that yard. Small boys hurled themselves at chickens like football players. We were bound to catch them sooner or later, um, for as one group became exhausted, another took up the chance. If we had played a fair game, those chickens' rest periods, we would have never caught them. But by keeping at them, we finally wore them down, and they were caught. Completely exhausted and almost shorn of their feathers, Everyone in the mob felt good and happy then, and we paid for our chickens and left. On the board, it was Sparky's job to kill them, and he hated it, but finally he cut off their heads and was sick. He hung them over the side of the boat and came along and mashed them flat against our side. But even then, they were tough. They had the most highly developed muscles we had ever seen. Their legs were like those of ballet dancers, and there was no softness in the breast. We stewed them for many hours, and it did not do any good whatsoever. We were sorry to kill them, for they were gallant, fast chickens. In our country, they would have easily have gotten scholarships in one of the great universities and had a collegiate career, for they had the spirit and the fight, and for all we know, the loyalty. On the afternoon tide, we were to collect El Magote, a low, sandy peninsula with a great expense of shallows, which would be very exposed at low tide. A high tide level was defined by a heavy growth of mangrove. The area was easily visible from our anchor coral. A tall, handsome boy of about 19 had been idling about the Western Flyer. He had come in his own canoe, and he offered to paddle us to the tide flats. The boy's name was Raoul Velez. He spoke some English and was of great service for us, for his understanding was quick, and he helped valuably at the collecting. He told us the local names of many of the animals we had already taken. Uh, Cornunda was a hammerhead shark, Barco, the red snapper, Carcol, and also Burial, all snails in general, but particularly the large conch urchins were called erizio, and sea fens alban, albanicio, alban, abanico. Bromas were barnacles, and hacha for pina or a large clam. The sand flats were interesting. Alrighty, guys, page 100. You can dance away, and I am out this bit. Bye.